يعني اوكي
ما مشهورين شوي. طيب I'm going to start with a few questions مع الأستاذ نضال. هلا احنا يعني this session is more of informative, educational للستارت-ups on how to deal with different issues. Okay, we're going to start off. What are some of the key things that founders should have been prepared when they decide to approach the 50 plus investors that are here?
Should we speak in English?
في حدا
Is there someone who doesn't speak Arabic?
خلاص أعطيها
في حدا بيحكيش عربي.
Okay, we'll have to start in
okay.
2-3 people. تفضل.
So بتعتمد بأي مرحلة أنتوا، فإذا أنتوا بتحكوا مع مستثمر أول مرة ماشيين هون هيك بالكوريدورات وعارفين إنه أحكي إنجليزي؟
في 2-3.
Sorry. So it depends on the stage that you're at. So if it's an introduction meeting or you're not forcing yourself, you're pretending to be coming across an investor in the alley somewhere, that's where you need to have your elevator pitch. This is probably a common phrase for everybody. That's your sort of 1 to 2 minute where you make it very clear and make sure that you're very concise and make sure that the person in front of you understands what you're doing, right? And your objective here is to get a follow-on meeting. Now, if you are in the follow-on meeting, or if you're in a meeting that's booked and you have to go, that's when you need your pitch deck, which is your investment pitch and your slides. And in there, that's a long story, but you really basically have to address two angles really. There's the angle of that it's critical for the investors to understand you quickly so that they can move on to deciding whether they're interested in hearing more or not, right? That's one angle. The other angle is you have to always remember that investors want to invest in companies that will return their fund. In other words, that you will become the next big thing. You will become so big as a company that they will make so much money on it, right? Because if they have a portfolio of 20 to 30 companies, the chances are most of them will not make it. And it's only the 1 or 2 that will make such big returns that will return the fund. It's actually a common phrase in the investment world. So they need to make sure that you need to make the point that your company will become the next big thing and that it can do that quickly and that you're the right team to do it. So you have in your pitch to build that case. What is the problem you're solving? It is a problem that has a high priority. It has a very clear target segment. It has a market that grows at least 10 times more every year or faster every year, and your product must be 10 times better than the product of the competition, and all the components of the pitch. You have to do that. And in that meeting, you have to know your metrics cold. I just did a video on that yesterday. If I ask you about your sales, you really have to know your sales. I don't need you to go check them on your Excel sheet. You have to know them today, yesterday, 3 months ago, since you started. And you have to be able to dig down at least 2 levels down and know the numbers off the top of your head. So you have to know your metrics really, really well. This is just a quick...
who sees or waits for Nidal to release his unleashnow.io videos? Who hasn't visited or seen his videos?
You can all leave now.
2-3 people. You've gotten a few SEO experts probably around. You can ask them how to increase your reach.
I have to be convinced with what they do first. They change the whole language.
Is it that simple?
Well, it's that simple, but then to make that case that you will become the next big thing and you can do it quickly and that you're the right team, that's where you have to convince me that you're solving a really high priority problem, that your target segment is clear, that your market size is growing at a rate that will make sure that happens, that the growth is that strong. You have to make the case that your competitive landscape will allow you to succeed. You're either differentiated or your product is so much better than others. You have to make the case that you are the right team, and this is critical.
Okay.
To make all these things is really a moving target, right? It's not simple.
Yes.
However, you will not be able to do that if you're not solving a problem that's worth solving. I mean, this is just...
So it's not something that's nice to have, but something that you must have it.
That's right.
It solves a real problem. It's not an increase of, it's a better experience.
It has to be something, yes. It has to be something I'm willing to leave whatever I'm spending money on to spend on you.
Okay.
It has to be that critical, otherwise I won't do it. And then you can't sell anything.
Okay. We'll move to Ustaz Waleed.
Thank you.
A lot of the startups, if you walk around, they'll tell you, okay, what do I do? I've got the idea, I've got a prototype, maybe a pre-MVP. Do I set up in Jordan? Do I set up somewhere else? Do I set up a limited partnership, BVI, an offshore? How do they go about it? How do they do the right thing? Because when you talk to the 50 or so startups out there, every single one has a different legal setup.
Legal setup basically is the first core matter that any startup wants to do. So partners, what happens? Partners, they generally have an idea and they say, okay, this is a good idea. Let's do a startup. And what we usually see is that sometimes it takes a while for the startup to create a legal entity, and that I find to be the biggest problem, because sometimes just the partners forget about the agreement between them, and this results in maybe conflict later on that is not bound by a certain particular agreement. So the core between partners is usually to have an agreement. Now the legal structure sets that agreement. So basically a company's articles of association dictate what the partners have agreed upon, what their shares are, what are their obligations, and there generally should be an exit clause. So if I am a partner that decides to leave after a while, how do I leave? What requirements do I need to do? What are my obligations when I leave? If that's not agreed upon, then problems will happen, and problems do happen, and we've seen them with startups, we've seen them with big companies as well. Now, in terms of legal setup, usually the most, if you're from Jordan, your partners are from Jordan, people usually think, well, let's start in Jordan. Let's establish a company in Jordan. Whether it's a limited liability company or a private shareholding company, I'll explain the differences between these. But generally, companies do set up, startups do come and set up companies here. Sometimes they hear from investors, potential investors, that, oh, go do a holding company somewhere. So what is the difference? Establishing a company in Jordan means that you want to operate in Jordan and potentially operate elsewhere, but that you're starting in Jordan. So you set up a limited liability company. What does a limited liability company? It means the liability of the partners is limited to their share capital of the company. Right? So you do a limited liability company with a share capital of 1,000 JDs, for example, with two partners or two shareholders, each owning 50%, then the liability in case something happens of the shareholder is limited to the 500 JDs. But in a limited liability company, the shares are depending on your control, and the dividends that you receive or your liability depends on your share in the company. There's another different type of company called a private shareholding company. That company is, you set up what they call different classes of shares. So you have Class A, Class B, Class C. Class A, you say, Class A has full control and gets 80% of the dividends. The rest are, then Class B has zero control over the company and has 20% of the dividends. What does that mean? It means that you as initial shareholders, okay, you are under Class A, so you have 80% of the shares divided between two, so each has 40%, 40%. And then when you bring in investors, passive investors, they come in and say, well, I want to be a passive investor. I don't want control. You go do whatever you want as investors, but I just want a share of the profits. To do that, you need a private shareholding company, because you can't do that with a limited liability company. But you've registered, let's say, a private shareholding company or a limited liability company in Jordan. What do we usually see from investors is that, well, why don't you have a holding company? And what does that mean? A holding company is a company that will own other companies. So it's the purpose of that company is for investment purposes only. It can be registered in Jordan. It can be registered Cayman Islands, the BVI. The decision on where to register sometimes also depends on the investor, but a lot of the times depends on the tax situation. So what are the tax obligations on the holding company? And tax is becoming the biggest question to ask. If you are distributing profits in the holding company, are these profits subject to tax? Are they subject to tax locally? Are they subject to tax if you transfer the profits outside of the country where the holding company is set up? So this begs the question, usually tax. But why are holding companies created? So you create a holding company. That holding company owns all the intellectual property in the platform, let's say, that you're developing. And then this holding company invests in a Jordanian entity because that Jordanian entity wants to work in Jordan. And then invests in a Saudi entity that wants to operate in Saudi, and so on and so forth, right?
So what you're saying is that you need to hire an expert, a lawyer like yourself, or anybody who really understands the complex setup of the startups to grow in order to be ready for the VCs.
Generally speaking, my advice, not because I'm a lawyer, but do seek legal advice, do seek tax advice, and do seek financial advice. There are lawyers who, and not just for the legal structure. And sometimes a startup once called me and they said, well, I have this, our idea is to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then my response was that you're taking unnecessary risk. You shouldn't be, your model as a startup is taking unnecessary risk. If you do it this way or that way, then you're avoiding this risk. So sometimes because, startups people who are creating startups might not necessarily understand the legal risks. So it's good to just vet your idea with a lawyer saying, well, this is my idea and what do you think? Am I taking unnecessary risk? First. Second, a lawyer can advise on the legal structure. Whether you want to set up locally, do you want to set up a holding company? So if you do set up a holding company and then an investor comes, then your holding company is ready. So you have the investor investing in the holding company, and that automatically means that holding company owns the other companies in that group. But what we're seeing these days, because a lot of countries are signing on tax treaties, transfer pricing, base profiling treaties, they call them. So this puts tax obligations on companies that are at arm's length, so that they are related, or there are shareholders in the different companies. And sometimes the problem with holding companies. So, for example, in Jordan, there are restrictions, and I'm sure this is in every country. There are restrictions on who can own what in terms of nationality. So, if you're, let's say, a French company, you want to invest in a company in Jordan that does trading business, then there are restrictions. And there are, of course, exceptions that you can get, but there are also restrictions. So this is part of the regulatory approval.
Okay. So thank you. Charles, you've got a startup, you've got some revenue, legally set up correctly, different legal structures. How do you protect yourself as a startup? The copyright, the source code, the brand, do you protect in each country? Or it's a worldwide agreement? These are the standard ABC questions that a lot of the founders, startups ask.
Thank you, Ziad. Sorry, and hello, everyone. In fact, very important questions. Thank you, Ziad. Let me start by just differentiating, although I know
Charles, can you, the mic near you? Thank you.
Most of the audience, I'm sure they know the different IP services, intellectual property services, but just a small reminder. When you have an idea, usually, let's say a book or a software, usually protected as a copyright. So the copyright is the protection of the source code, as Ziad mentioned. This is usually copyrighted, so no one can take it. The name of the software is a trademark. A trademark is mainly a word, a logo, or a combination, of course, word or logo. And now even we are starting seeing non-traditional trademarks, we call the sound even. Not still in Jordan, but in many countries you can protect the sound, the smell even as a copyright. As a trademark. The patent is another service which you hear about always. The patent is how you protect the process to get your invention. And finally, the design, or what's called the industrial design, is mainly the shape. If you have a product, the shape of this product. So why I started with this, because I think this takes us to Ziad's main question. Should you protect what? So you decide. If you are having, for example, an app, I think this for sure you need to have a name for it. This is the trademark. The source code of it is a copyright. In some countries, Europe, US, and so on, they allow you to protect the software sometimes as a patent, but it has many restrictions. You need to make sure that you have something very new. It's connected to a hardware sometimes. It's hard, not like before, but still you can do it. Not in the Middle East in general, not only in Jordan. Still not patented. The software is not patented. Why I'm saying this? Because another important part of Ziad's question was, where should you protect? This is the problem of the intellectual property services in general. It's still territorial until now. There are some international treaties. I will talk briefly about them now. But mainly, when you know that you want to market, let's say, in Jordan and the US, it's good to have your trademark protected in Jordan and the US. You can't say that it's only if I have it in Jordan, it's protected everywhere. In fact,
Charles, what's they all say, what's the cost?
sorry?
What's the cost of protecting
This is the
in
problem.
Jordan and
The
the
cost
US?
is different from each country, from a country to country. For example, the most expensive in the world is in our region, Emirates and Saudi Arabia until now. Japan is expensive.
What's a
Jordan,
figure?
not very expensive. This is trademark, I'm talking, for example.
Okay.
Trademark registration. Copyright usually is, by the way, copyright in specific, you don't need to protect. Let us be very honest. Some people doesn't know. A copyright, it's already protected when you publish it. This is by law of the Berne Convention, which is 1950 something. So any country who is a member of the Berne Convention, which is more than 160 countries, usually follow this convention. But why we recommend to put it somewhere, in the National Library in Jordan, for example, to protect your software or your book or something. In case there was any problem in the future, someone taking it and so on, you have the legal evidence. This is what we call the legal evidence that you have this copyright that was in the National Library filed 1990 something or something like this. But back to your question, the cost of the copyright usually is the most cheap, let's say, the cheaper. So at least it's easier to do it, this recording, in more than one country who allows it, by the way.
Okay.
Some countries you don't have a copyright. UK, you don't have to put any copyright because they consider it, as we said, it's already protected.
Yeah. Before we open up for questions, just one metaverse. Copyright, it's all about copyrights.
Metaverse, okay, the metaverse, I like to ask this question. Until now in our region, not yet, but in China, Europe, and US, you will be amazed at the number of trademark applications that's related to metaverse. There is something in the trademark called the NIS classification, which is mainly 45 classes. From class 1 until class 34 is mainly for goods. From class 35 until 45, it's for services. We are now in what we call the classification version 11. They are working, the World Intellectual Property Organization are working on version 12 to include the metaverse and NFTs in specific, by the way. They will include them. But for now, some countries already started taking applications. In China, as an example, until September this year, more than 200,000 applications contains trademark related to metaverse. 200,000.
Wow.
Only this is. And just to keep in your mind, I know it's hard not to, because I don't even know it by heart. Class 9, usually, if you have any downloadable product you want to protect in the metaverse, you protect it in class 9 as a trademark. So when you apply for the trademark, you say, I want to protect in class 9. Class 35 is for the platform, usually that have this NFTs and so on. So not the product itself inside it. If you have a name of this platform, you are selling on it and so on in the metaverse. Class 42 is for non-downloadable services. So anything you offer in the metaverse, not downloadable, is class 42. Now, again, US always has different opinions. They opened 41 for entertainment services. And Europe, they have the 36 for financial services, like tokens and so on. So I told you, it's not for you to memorize, even I don't know them, but usually because there are 45 classes, as we said. But this is the answer to the question, yes, you can start from now put this in your mind. If you want to go to this metaverse, make sure that your trademark is protected in these classes so no one can make counterfeit or try to imitate you.
Thank you, Charles. You had a comment?
I have a comment about copyright for computer software. Now, most startups are IT startups, and they're building a platform. The problem with copyright protects the expression. And the expression in software is the computer code. And we all know that if you write a program in C++, you can write it in another way, in a different form of expression under Java. And that's where issues with copyright happen. Copyright doesn't need to be recorded to be protected, but if you do record it, let's say at the National Library, then you're making it public. And that makes sometimes a problem for the developers. What usually happens, how do you protect your copyright in the computer software? Usually it's the terms and conditions. So let's say you are developing a platform, and this platform, I'm a user who registers on this platform. I get a, when you register, you agree on that page of terms and conditions that usually no one reads. But if you go into these terms and conditions, you will find a clause there that says the limitations. You're not allowed to decompile. You're not allowed to reverse engineer, alter, modify, translate. This is an agreement at the end of the day. If you violate this agreement, you contravene any of the provisions, then you are subject to, you're in breach of that agreement, and you may be subject to the liability requirements or conditions under this agreement. So this is something that startups should really consider. The terms and conditions of the platform agreement or the license. If you're selling software, then the license. At the end of the day, you're not selling the software. You're not selling the source code or the technical documentation. You are selling a license to use this software. And the terms and conditions are very important. So that's the problem with copyright. One important thing also for copyright is if you are developing the copyright, the software yourselves as the founders of the startup, make sure that if you find computer code somewhere on some website, that you don't just copy and paste it and use it. That code might be subject to a license, even if it's open source. We all know what open source is, and open source means that you can use this code and continue to use it. But open source also comes with licenses. So some of the licenses, some of the licenses basically say that you can just copy the code. Other licenses say you can copy the code, but you have to credit whoever wrote the code. Other licenses say you can copy the code, and whatever development you make to the code, you should republish it online.
So you have to read all those
You have to be aware.
agreements before you tick.
You have to
You
be aware.
usually say okay directly, don't say
Who reads the terms and conditions and agreements? Other than Ziad Nasser, who reads it. Okay, let's open up for questions. You can mic on your تسمعين.
Hello, my name is Omar Mufti. I just have a question regarding intellectual property. For example, we are working on a mobile application, and when we were working on doing the agreement with the developer, we disagreed on one of the points, which is the source code and who owns the source code. So for me, it was pure logic that since I am paying for the development of the software, then I should be owning the source code. Now, the developer's point was he uses certain frameworks that he has been using them for the past years. And for him, if he wants to give me the source code, then he has to give me these frameworks that he's been working on for a long time. So I have like two questions within this question. Is intellectual property separated from source code in this case? And the second question is, can I own the intellectual property but not have the source code, for example? Can I own it and then have the source code with the developer until later stages, for example?
Wow. Who would like to try to answer that?
No, just maybe I'll start with the second one because this is important. Who owns the source code or who's owed the intellectual property? As you mentioned, for example, if you are working for a company This is part of your agreement. You are the developer, but if you are working for Microsoft, for example, you develop Excel. Excel is for Microsoft, not for you, not the source code of Excel itself. So something like this. And the other question I think you asked, you are using a platform or a framework. That framework is owned by the company that's owned, but you will own the copyright of only the code that you added to it. So yes, it is part of it. I expect my colleague Waleed is a lawyer, knows more legal issues.
Your agreement with the consultant or the service provider is crucial here.
Sorry, what?
The agreement with the service provider is crucial. The developer, let's say
Developer.
يعني at the end of the day مش رح نخلص منها الدبانة نضلها ملزق حبيبتي مش عارف. So the agreement with the service provider, consultant, developer is crucial. First of all, the developer must guarantee that he or she, or if it's a company, are not infringing the intellectual property rights of others. So you don't want a claim coming from XYZ in the future saying, oh, your platform is infringing my intellectual property. So how do you guarantee that? You include a provision that says the contract that you as a service provider, you're not infringing, and hopefully if they agree, you indemnify me for, in case I am accused of, and even defend in case of an intellectual property claim against me that involves the code that you're doing. If there's, usually if you are paying for it, then you should own it at the end of the day. And what does that mean? You should own the source code, and you should own the technical documentation. Because the source code alone, without the technical documentation, if you bring another service provider, it might be difficult for them to follow.
هذا بيشطح فيك الديفلوبر عاد.
Sorry?
بيشطح فيك.
مش؟
ديفلوبر بيشطح فيك.
بيشرح فيك developer.
بيشطح فيك.
بيشطح فيك.
ايش بدك تدفع له بقول لك بعطيك ايش.
طب استاذ وليد يعني بالمحاكم خلينا نحكي بالاردن.
سؤال عويس هذا اللي عم تسالني.
لا بس how many source code related developer cases are out there? Minimum, very minimum, or?
I haven't seen, to be honest.
I haven't seen it.
I haven't seen. Usually usually at the end of the day, you have an agreement with the service provider, and you subject it, there must be a clause, particularly if the software developer is not from Jordan, you're from Jordan, you're a Jordanian entity, and the software developer is from a different country. There has to be a jurisdiction clause and an applicable law clause. So what law applies, right? That is in terms of the agreement between you and the service provider or the developer. But if I am a company, okay, and I believe that your platform is infringing my copyright, of course I have to prove that, but then I go after you where you are based, right? Or where the infringement occurs. In terms of copyright, the Berne Convention, which is an international treaty that has, as Charlie said, has been signed by, I don't know, 160 plus countries. And this harmonizes the laws across these 160 countries in terms of what you protect, how you protect the rights. And if there's an infringement in one country, okay, so if the infringement occurs in Jordan, you can sue in Jordan or you can sue somewhere else, So it brings in harmonization. But you should protect ultimately you should protect yourself. You should own the source code, you should own the documentation, so hence the intellectual property around the code, okay? And you should make sure that person doesn't infringe, or the developer doesn't infringe others, other companies or other intellectual property, and there's an indemnification clause. That puts you in the, let's say, the position with the least risk.
Wait, thank you. Have a question over here, sorry.
Ziad, just a practical follow-up. Because startup, I think they will be interested in this. And the practical point, usually the software, as Waleed mentioned, you cannot find a lot of, let's say, cases for a very simple reason. We saw, for example, Karim now in a previous session. Karim and Uber, when they started. So Uber started this type of service. When Karim opened, could Uber sue them? No, they can say simply, I did a different software. The result is the same. You are hailing a car and go on, but the software is not infringement. So This is why I give an advice for all the startups. Wonderful to have, of course, your copyright protection for your code, but make sure you have a specific trademark for it. This will stay with you more.
Thank you.
It will be known for this trademark.
Thank you, Charles. تفضل أستاذ.
Hello, my name is Abdurrahman Sabbagh, Team Sarmadi. I would like to ask, regarding startups in ICT, which country or place is it best to make the place headquarters in to minimize costs and to maximize profit and let's say productivity based on your experience? Thank you.
Nidal, would you like? I mean,
that's a loaded question.
Yes, from many aspects, I'm saying.
So ask the most important piece in that question to you. Which one? Because you just gave us a very wide.
No, it's broad.
So what's the biggest pain in that for you?
Let's say legal regulations and taxes.
So it depends, right? So if you're in Jordan, there's a very clear taxation system. هلا when راح تروح الضريبة, it's not as clear sometimes, but every company is defined how much income tax they pay, how much sales tax they pay. The agreements sometimes would be on the assessment, right? But you have very clear, if you do your taxes every year, if you have audited statements, it's very clear. So the question is, do you want to open here and pay, I don't know, what is it, 20% income tax now or less?
If you're in the ICT, you get.
Or you get this, you get I think benefits.
Jordan is a good place for ICT.
So Jordan actually is a good place for that. Or do you go to a country in the Gulf and go in an internet zone somewhere, free economic zone somewhere? So it's a decision you have to make, and it's pros and cons, right? Probably the labor will be much more expensive in the country where you get more tax benefits. So it's an assessment, a general assessment. So it's very difficult to give a wide, overarching answer for that.
You have to look at your product, the market.
Yes.
You have to look at where you want to go in the future, where your investors are. So there's a lot of questions you need to answer to get what you're looking for.
But for all startups out there, you know yourselves, مش شطارة that you don't register with the tax people. Because if they find out about you, they're not very nice, right?
And they will.
So they will. So it's very important that you are registered, that you are legal, and that you are invested a little bit in making sure that you submit your taxes on time and that you have the statements they need. Because as long as you do that, everything's fine. The second you are late, the second you don't know, the second you don't take it seriously, it gets ugly. By the way, anywhere in the world, not just Jordan.
Yep.
So it's very important at one point. If you're on a stage where you're just developing the product and you're doing the MVP and you're doing the testing and the validation and you don't yet know what's happening, okay, maybe you don't need to be registered at that point. But once things are clear and you know that this is the product you want to develop and go to the market, it becomes time to consider things like legal registration and trademarks and all that stuff.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Can I comment on that as well?
Our lawyers like to comment on every comment.
I was going to say that, but then I didn't because I'm nice.
Regulatory requirements are very, very important. So let's say you're building a platform that ends up doing some form of financing. This needs licensing, right? So in a lot of jurisdictions, and this is happening here as well. So you have to look into what are the local requirements. So if you want to operate in Jordan, you have to see, do I need to license, not license? This is a very important question.
Okay, please.
Yeah, actually, I had one comment, not a question. You've asked about court cases.
Yep.
This is me, Rania Al-Nabil. I'm representing the Royal Hashemite Court, but I faced a case back when I was in the private sector. Two platforms that were quite similar in terms of source code and ordering things. The first obstacle we faced in courts here, they don't understand the concept of source codes. They don't have this IT background, so we need to support it with expert determination and expert reports. The way out was the agreement of our client was quite clear who owns the IP rights, who owns every single bit of the program and the platform, and this was halfway through the case. It was 80% of winning a case due to such documents available and signed between the parties. And here I come to differentiate between, are you dealing with an employer who did an employer-employee relationship for a platform, or is it a consultancy agreement to do a platform? And here the IP rights differ. If it's an employer-employee, it's for the employer. If it's for a consultancy, question marks arise.
Yeah.
So you need to be clear.
It's a good point because today VCs do a lot of due diligence, not just financial, not just legal, but they look at the technical part, they look at all the agreements, so they really dig deep. And once they see one thing that is out of line, they back off. Very important. Can I have a question back there, please? Ziad, you have to ask a question.
Hello, good evening.
After the gentleman over there.
All right. We are a startup here in Jordan, and we have been pitching to several VCs from Jordan and outside Jordan. And they usually request that we prepare some documents, the shareholder agreement documents, for example, convertible notes or SAFE or other kind of agreements. But I haven't found any legal consultant here in Jordan that can help us set up these kind of agreements. Most lawyers here in Jordan, they don't even speak English and have nowhere where to start, and they have no idea how to set up, for example, a holding company in Delaware or Cayman Island, etc. Is there such legal entities here in Jordan that can help us with these things? The VCs just said, go look for a pro bono lawyer in the States or something like that, and we have no access.
To do what?
To do these shareholder agreements. They want us to
So the VC is asking you to do a shareholder agreement?
Yeah.
Are you sure that's a VC you want to deal with?
Yeah, it's one of the VCs here, actually, in the
Well, typically the VC sends you the term sheet that they would like, and the negotiations start from there. If a VC is asking you, and maybe I'm not understanding, if he's asking you to give him an example of a convertible note, you said, or a safe note,
to draft something that we are comfortable with.
The VC asked you to draft a convertible note that you're comfortable with and send it to them.
Yeah,
run away.
Yeah.
Okay,
run away.
Run away. In terms of law firms, yes, usually there isn't much experience, and this is a whole new field for law firms. I personally, I'm going to be very frank, I have very limited experience when it comes to convertible notes and all of that. But this is coming, and law firms or lawyers who are intuitive and who are courageous would go out there to learn more about it. What you can find is maybe law firms that have relationships with or cooperations with external law firms that can guide you, but this usually also comes at a cost.
If I may, there are resources online that you can use
as well.
The Y Combinator safe note is excellent. If he's saying tell me, well, I want, great, then send him the safe note at Y Combinator. It's the best one out there.
There's also Clara. There's a platform called Clara that you can go to. Also, they do help out with if you want to register a holding company. It's in the Cayman Islands, or you want all these documents, then I think it's based on some form of artificial intelligence as well in that.
Yeah, it is.
Right. Can I make a comment here?
Hi. Question, Mr.
Ziad. It's actually a comment, but
a question.
A question. Sorry. There are 3 or 4 very well-known firms, but they charge a lot of fees. So they are expensive for startups. Also, there are firms in accounting firms who specialize in revising the financial arrangements. Also, they are not very cheap, not very well priced. So I think that Intaj should have like an initiative where I want to throw this back at you, Ziad. I think Intaj should have an initiative where they agree with a couple of leading lawyers in Jordan who do shareholder agreements, convertibles, كل هدول الأشياء.
حاضر
Also maybe you already have an accounting firm who we're working with who does that also for startups. So just wanted to make this comment. I want to say I really enjoy any panel that you're moderating.
الله يخليك.
حياك الله. بعدين أستاذ وليد الدبان بيجي غير على الحلوين.
We have one more question because of time. زياد.
استنى شوي زياد بقول له الدبان بيجي غير على الحلوين.
الله يخليك تسلم.
We have just to wrap up. We have one more question. Quick question at the back to the left, please.
To the right.
يعطيكم العافية. Thank you. I really enjoyed the panel. You answered a lot of questions that I had. We are launching a brand soon that has a lot to do with organic stuff. essentially the idea that I got is very simplistic, but for some reason, no one has launched something like that yet. It's just the concept, not a lot of product design. I was wondering what the fastest way is, or what you would advise, because I really believe in the idea, how to protect it as much as possible, or what countries to protect it in.
Thank you. Do you want me to answer it? I think you only say brand because I took the floor before Ziad saying, because I expected you want to protect it as a trademark. This is what your question is specific for now. Which countries?
No, so the brand itself, I do want to do that, but under the brand there are certain products, and one of these products has a very crazy twist, but it's very simple, but no one has done it before. So I want to protect the design, the concept
so that's a
of
patent.
that product. Patent, yes.
He wants to patent.
A patent,
Yeah.
Okay, as a patent, you can do that, but which country you're saying? To be honest, make it from the business side, where you want your product to be the main market for it. So if the main market is the US, go ahead and have the patent in the US. It's expensive, but it's worth it. If you want it in more than one country, there is something called the PCT, Patent Cooperation Treaty. Jordan is a member of it recently. Emirates is in the region. So you can protect it in the countries who are members in this PCT, not all the countries yet members. You file usually one application it's two phases. The first phase, one application in what's called the international phase. So you put the needed documents, the patent, you draft the patent and so on. And then the second phase is you select which countries you protect. So this, when you select the second phase, mainly depends how much you will pay. This is the option. If, to be honest and practical, we are here, as Ziad said, to give you advices. If it's only one or two countries, maybe PCT is not necessary for you. You go to these countries directly. Just file a national patent in these two countries. The important thing is that to make sure, as you mentioned, that it is new. You said nobody thought about it, so it is patentable. But when they search for the patent, when they examine it, if they found anything already patented more than 1 year before and so on, you lose it. But not lose it, they don't accept it. This is the main thing. Okay. The other issue is that if you choose the countries, if you want more than one country individually, you need to be sure to apply usually within the same year, within 12 months. Because if you don't do that, after 12 months, most of the countries usually 12 months.
So you should talk to Charles right
talk
after.
To Charles.
Yeah.
Talk to Charles.
المحامي.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you
talk
so
to
much.
Charles, talk to Ustaz Waleed, talk to Sayyid Nidal.
أنا شو دخلني?
Subscribe to his channel. We really don't have time.
Yes, we have 1 minute. That's
yes,
right. Okay, 2
yes.
minutes. Okay.
I just want to mention.
To comment on a comment on a comment.
I just want to mention something that you as startups, your focus should be to introduce measures to minimize the risk of an investor coming and saying, well, you haven't protected your intellectual property, or you haven't protected. So you should. Should be your objective. How do I do that? I have a legal structure. I have good agreements with my employees. I have good agreements with my service providers, consultants, developers. And one point that I wanted to mention, but I think we're running out of time, is data protection requirements. Data protection and privacy. Now, this is something, GDPR, this is something very big in Europe, in some states in the US. There's a data protection law in the UAE, in Saudi Arabia, in Egypt. There's a draft currently before Parliament. What does that mean? That means that you have to protect your personal data of data subjects, or of people who provide you with personal data. What is personal data? It's data that identifies a person. So what do you need to do? You need to look at the requirements and the principles of GDPR or data protection and implement them into your systems. Privacy by design is the biggest one. So design your systems taking privacy into consideration. So because we don't have much time, but this is something that I wanted to open up with you.
Hold on, guys. In the bootstrapping world you live in, اوعكم تصرفوا فلس على الباتنت ولا البطيخة لما تجيبوا الاستثمار. Although it's very important. So if you عندك $3,000 تروح ليش تدفع لي $2,000 على الباتنت؟ You put it in your plan. When you talk to the investor, you say, a part of the $100,000 I need is to spend 5,000 on the patent. Do not spend that money وتخلص مصاريك وانت مش باني product عشان الباتنت. He's a lawyer. مش بجيبته 3000.
أنا مش قايلكم تعالوا سجلوا patents.
Anyway, sorry. With that, we're going to close the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
In the next few minutes, we need 5 minutes. Sorry, we don't have time. You can talk to them after the session.
Tell him إنه بالجمعية العلمية الملكية iPark will give free advice on patentability to anybody who asks.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. Talk to الجمعية العلمية الملكية. They've got free consultancy and advice. Thank you very much.